There is something like illusion in the world. There is no question about it. What exactly is the contour of this illusion in the world? How much is the illusion? And that requires a microscopic perception. And it is that perception which has been described in this chapter. What is knowledge and what is ignorance? Ignorance certainly is the parent of illusion. And if there is ignorance, there has got to be illusion also. And how that illusion arises, how ignorance arises, and how in the light of knowledge ignorance remains or does not remain, and how it ceases. It is in this context that Sri Aurobindo describes also the Vedic theory of knowledge and ignorance. And he brings out how the Vedic theory of knowledge and ignorance and the Upanishadic theory of knowledge and ignorance is quite different from the theory of knowledge and ignorance as it came to be formulated later on in the six systems of Indian philosophy. And what is the original theory of knowledge and ignorance, as in the Veda, with which Aurobindo agrees, and he says, this theory of knowledge and ignorance is the Vedic theory of knowledge and ignorance. Now, in order to describe this question in detail, Sri Aurobindo refers to the three great phenomena: memory, ego, and self-experience. And he devotes two important chapters to this analysis. Once again, there has been no such masterly exposition of these three phenomena ever in the history of thought as you find here. What is memory? These three phenomena of ignorance. In our ignorant consciousness, only in our ignorant consciousness these three phenomena can exist: self-experience, memory, and ego. These three phenomena exist in our ignorant consciousness. How do they arise? How they get built up? What is their function? Why should they arise at all? Why should there be such a thing as egoistic consciousness at all? It is like asking the question, why should there be waves in the ocean? Ocean being so wide, why such small worlds like oceans, these waves are created? There must be something in the very nature of water which can make a formation in the form of waves. So if egoistic consciousness exists in the world, there must be something in the supreme consciousness which is responsible for the formation of egoistic consciousness. There must be something in our consciousness which is the parent of memory. In fact, when you examine the idea of memory, it is a most surprising phenomenon. What is memory? Why should there be memory? Why do I remember? What is it stored? Where is it stored? How is it stored? There must be something in my consciousness like a storehouse. And that storehouse gets built up little by little and remains. Sometimes something is obliterated, sometimes it remains, sometimes something deeply impressed, sometimes faintly impressed. What is all this? Why does it happen? What is the mystery of this memory? And how far it can go? How much you can remember? What do you remember? These are mysterious phenomena which require to be deliberately examined before you come to any conclusion regarding the nature of reality and what possibilities exist for human consciousness. And then the experience of ego. How ego is formed. Why should ego be formed at all? What is the origin of ego? If everything is fundamentally universal, if the nature of the whole world is only universal, there can be waves fleeting waves perhaps. But why this ego which constantly goes on persisting? There is like a small toy which is constantly there like a cog. And it is with regard to every experience, it ties up with the ego. What is this mechanism? How is it arisen? What is its role in the building up of your being and your personality? These things need to be analyzed thoroughly. In fact, one of the most important chapters of modern psychology is connected with psychoanalysis, which tries to describe the development of id and ego and superego. These are some of the modern concepts of modern psychology. And when you read that and when you read this, you find oceanic difference between that concept and this concept, because the depth of knowledge which is required to determine what is ego, it requires, as it were, you see the whole ocean of consciousness, and having measured the ocean of consciousness, you determine the nature of egoistic consciousness, and how ego can be formed and how ego can be annulled. In Western psychology, there is no way of annulling ego. In fact, actually, Western psychology tells you should develop ego, you should nourish superego. There is no question of dissolution of ego. So, and that they do not actually know what is egoistic consciousness. How is it formed really? They are all building up of psychological fictions. They are not really the real explanations of how ego is formed. These very important things are described in these particular two chapters particularly. And if you describe these two chapters, you can define ignorance properly. You cannot define ignorance properly unless you define these phenomena, because these phenomena are special phenomena only of ignorant consciousness. Ignorance is to be distinguished from inconscience on one side and superconscience on the other. The Satchidananda is superconscient. The complete unconscious, there is no sensitivity at all. What is called in the Veda, the darkness shrouded in darkness. That is inconscience. So ignorance is not that darkness shrouded into darkness. Ignorance is like a night with stars in it. Stars mean there are some lights are hanging, although all is dark, and yet there are stars. So you might say that it is not a starless night. Inconscience is a starless night. But ignorance is a starful night. There are stars. In fact, the phenomenon of memory is a spark. There is a spark of knowledge. Some kind of knowledge, if not the full knowledge, but there is a sparkling of knowledge. Memory is a sparkling, the egoistic is a sparkling of light. So, this ignorance, which is distinguishable from inconscience on the one hand and superconscience on the other, superconscious is like the daylight, in which darkness cannot exist at all. So, this ignorance, which is in the middle, how that middle term arises, what is its scope, how far it can run, what are the banks of the ignorance, the two banks of ignorance, these are described in this chapter. Now comes next chapter, therefore, Aurobindo says, if you examine the phenomenon of ignorance, you find that there are four operations of knowledge which are present in this field of ignorance. Four operations of knowledge. Now, from what is called epistemology, this chapter is the most important chapter epistemologically. Because epistemology deals with the means of knowledge and the determination of the standards of knowledge, validity of knowledge. And this cannot be determined without the different forms of knowledge. And Sri Aurobindo distinguishes between different forms of knowledge, knowledge by identity and separative knowledge. And all the four operations which he describes here are operations of ignorance. In the ignorant consciousness, these four operations operate. All our methods of knowledge basically are knowledge in the field of ignorance. All our science is a science conducted in the field of ignorance. And therefore, all the scientific methods also fall within the light of these four methods of knowledge. Then Sri Aurobindo speaks of the boundaries of the ignorance. I spoke of the banks of ignorance, where exactly inconscience stops and ignorance starts. What is the scope of ignorance, its realm of ignorance, and where ignorance stops and the realm of knowledge begins. So, the boundaries of ignorance, if is like a geographer who has gone round the whole universe and has found out all the banks of various domains and various galaxies, and then finds out here are the boundaries of ignorance. And that great work Sri Aurobindo has accomplished in a few pages. He has described the whole boundaries of ignorance, so that you can be sure that ignorance consists only in these boundaries. Beyond that is inconscience, and beyond here is the knowledge. And then comes the origin of the ignorance. This chapter and the next one are the most important chapters in the Life Divine. The origin of the ignorance and exclusive concentration of consciousness and ignorance. This particular question, how in the field of supermind, and if supermind remains present all the time, and yet ignorance exists, how can it be possible? What is the origin of it? Both in the West and in the East, this question has been raised. There is no philosophical work in the world which has raised this question so squarely and has answered so squarely as this book, The Life Divine. You go through the whole literature of philosophy all over the world, you will not find a chapter called The Origin of Ignorance and Exclusive Concentration of Consciousness and Ignorance. These two chapters. And they are so central because if you do not know the nature of ignorance and the origin of ignorance, you cannot deal with the elimination of the origin. It is only when you know what is the origin of a disease that you can cure the disease. We are told that you have to get out of ignorance. This is the message of all Indian thought. But when you ask the question, what is the origin of ignorance, you will find such hopelessness in Indian thought. The first answer is, ignorance is anadi. That is to say, it is beginningless. This is one answer you get. Everywhere you read, ignorance is anadi, it is beginningless. Therefore, what is the origin? It has no origin because it's anadi. So question doesn't arise. Then you are told, if it is anadi, is it ananta? Because according to philosophical thought, what is anadi must be ananta also. Then you are told, it is ananta, but still it can be eliminated. It is surprising. It is ananta, of course, it will always remain. But you can throw it out. you can cease to be ignorant. So, although it is anadi, although it is ananta, still it is something which you can eliminate. Why, how, that is all to be understood. You are too young, you cannot know it. How can you know it? Why? Because it is inexplicable. This is a further answer. Ignorance is inexplicable. You can't explain it. It is anirvachaniya. It cannot be explained. This is you go to any system of a law, whether you go to Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, anywhere. You take Buddhism, you take Jainism, anywhere. It is not something partial to any philosophy. How this ignorance has arisen, how the soul, according to Jainism, the soul is absolutely pure. Yet it is corrupted because of Pudgal. Somehow the matter, which is Jada, has come into touching with this particular soul. It has become polluted and impure. How it can happen? If it is really pure, how can it be polluted? If it is really pure. But if you work it out, it will become pure. Then afterwards it will never become impure. Once you have worked it out. But why now? Why from the beginning itself, if it was pure, has come into touching with this particular soul, it has become polluted and impure. How it can happen? If it is really pure, how can it be polluted? If it is really pure. But if you work it out, it will become pure. Then afterwards it will never become impure. Once you have worked it out. But why now? Why from the beginning itself, if it was pure, why should it have been polluted at all? This question you should not ask and should not be answered, cannot be answered. So you keep quiet. It's a mystery. The most important question of world history from the point of the individual is the fact of ignorance. And this most important question is all the time being answered in these ambiguous terms. It has somehow happened. You go to Buddhism. It simply says you find yourself in the state of suffering. Why should it so happen? They say, look, are you troubled by the thorn in the flesh? I can take it out from you. Then why do you bother about asking this question, how this thorn has come into the flesh? You are suffering, no? I have the solution to your suffering, so attend to the suffering solution. Don't ask the question, how it has come about. This suffering exists, it's a real truth, the only eternal truth. Suffering is. I have an answer to you. I can take out your suffering. But don't ask this question. And when you ask fundamental questions, Buddhism says they are all useless questions. Don't ask such questions. World is real, unreal, whatever it is. How the real, ultimate reality is one or many or none, don't ask those questions. I can only give you a remedy to your suffering, and that is all that is necessary for you, and I have got an answer to you. This is the answer of Buddhism. You go to Indian philosophers, ask this very question. It is Leela of God. Why there is ignorance? It's a sport of God. He wants to play, he wants to hide himself, he has hidden himself. How can he hide himself? If he's so luminous, self-luminous, how can he be hidden? There must be some magic in him. What is that magic? I want to know. What is the origin of that magic? It's a play. It's all Leela. You are at present in trouble. Why? Because in this Leela, you have forgotten to play. So play with him. Knock the door of God, He will come and reveal Himself, and you will be in Vrindavan afterwards forever. But don't ask the question how this has come about. You are in that condition of Leela. You are playing with God. Somehow it has happened. Or you are in ignorance, it is inexplicable. Anirvachaniya Maya is all illusion. Who says you are in difficulty? Are you in difficulty? If you are in difficulty, it is an illusion. You are not. None is bound. None is to be freed. None is striving to be free. All that you are saying that you are bound is an illusion. You are striving to be free is also illusion. You are going to be striven, going to be driven towards freedom is also an illusion. You are ever free. Satchidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. All the time you are Shiva, Satchidananda. If you think that you are not, it is only illusion. But don't ask the question how this illusion has come about. It's all anadi and yet it is inexplicable. It only can be removed. I can remove it. In other words, this question of ignorance has remained